have more technical terms for this, one of two things. Removing the dam or opening the escape valve and letting the water out.
I think that's one of the issues that the study that we're looking to fund will investigate as well, because there's options you can take. It can either be a quick drawdown, which has some of its own issues as well, or a slow drawdown. So there's the engineering solutions, as Bob was alluding to, which are the dam removal or opening the siphon valves on some of the large dams, or else, and then allowing natural drainage processes to happen. Now there's engineering, of course, hydrological considerations with that as well. So what we're looking to do is investigate those various options and what will be the most feasible, the least environmentally, or the most environmentally benign as well.
So another question, so at the very back corner, Michael's going to get fit running around the cinema.
Hi, last summer I went kayaking overnight with my young family. I've got my young son here with me tonight, and we were just deeply moved to be out there and to think where was the original Lake Pedder under us. But I would love to see Lake Pedder restored, but it was interesting being out there camping and seeing how eroded the landscape has been and how altered it has been from the water levels up so high now. I'm just wanting to know how is this landscape going to restore? Like, how long is it going to take, and will those plants ever kind of regenerate?
First of all, because it's surrounded by natural vegetation, expecting there'll be a lot of natural regeneration occurring just from the seed, from the plants that are around there at the moment. So anywhere that's got a good landscape context like that, that increases the viability of restoration significantly, rather than being somewhere where it's in a degraded landscape. So it will recover. We don't know exactly how long it's going to take yet, and that's part of the reason why we're doing the study at the moment, to do some more research into that, to make sure we have all the answers before we actually intervene.
I think we've actually all been surprised at how resilient the landscape out there is now. At the end of 2009, there was quite a prolonged drought, and the Gordon impoundment itself was actually down, tens of metres on its full supply level. And what we saw in that time was that there were natural areas of remnant peat. Now that's the key to restoration, and that peat, over just a period of a few months, was green and thick and with a lawn and a carpet. So that sort of proved to us, just in concept at the time, that there's areas that will regenerate really well naturally. There will be other areas that we will have to do some engineering solutions to, for erosion control, protection from waves and things like that. But I think the preference, and especially what's been learnt in the United States, sort of shows that, let nature, use the resilience of nature first and foremost, use technological solutions as a backup when you need to.
Down the front here. Just keep Michael running.
Okay, thanks. Just a question about how you would see the campaign for Pedder restoration proceeding, particularly in the current political environment, where today I saw the Prime Minister talking about Tasmania being one of the batteries of the nation, where everyone in politics, well, not everyone of course, seems to have developed a real love for dams at the moment, and I just wonder how you see it progressing over the coming few years.
Thanks, and that's very much the case in Tasmania, and the Tasmania as the little green battery feeding the nation renewable energy is the Hydro's new vision for the state. And that all comes with the idea of selling Tasmania as a renewable energy hub, which feeds energy into the national electricity market to stabilise and smooth and act as a storage for renewable energy across the system. So there's no doubt the NEM needs that. The question is, at what point are you going to have pumped hydro storages built on the mainland that will eliminate that role for Tasmania? Either way, it makes it a really critical time to do this work on Pedder now, because what the hydro is now doing is considering how to reconfigure the entire hydro system in Tasmania to be the little green battery. And they have identified 14 sites where they are going to do pumped hydro storage. That will require more engineering works in many of those cases to build new underground stations and so on. Fortunately, they have put a screen across identifying those 14 sites as not in the World Heritage Area, so that's good. But in the reconfiguring, we have to make sure that they take Lake Pedder out as part of their assumptions in building the storage case. So now is a critical time for us to be engaged in that conversation, saying we don't want Pedder and Pedder's capacity as storage in the system to be in that calculation of the little green battery, because we want the option to restore it. So that's really important as to a reason for why we would do this now. The second thing is in terms of the process for the campaign. This campaign was derailed in the mid-90s by spurious allegations about platypus that would die and all manner of other things. At the time, we didn't have the fauna and flora and engineering and so on answers, and so it was easy for people to blow up the campaign with all kinds of allegations. This time around, we've decided that what we want to do is raise the money for a scoping study of everything that's ever been done on Pedder and surrounding areas, particularly on Gordon for restoration and so on. Then do a full restoration management plan, which includes all of those issues about how you would draw it down, what your phasing would be, what your restoration options are in terms of vegetation and the rest of it. And so it's the 50th anniversary of the inundation of Pedder in the summer of 2021 through to 2022. There are 2 federal elections and a state election in that time. It's a perfect time to have a full development plan, restoration plan and development application ready to go for the federal election in 2021-22. So that's really a evidence-based process that will underpin a political campaign at the state and federal level to build support to pull down the dams.
Thank you, Christine. Excellent to have that level of detail, and it is really a perfect time. Is there another question? Just hand up there.
I spoke to a man who worked for the hydro, who was an engineer a few years ago, and he said it only ever had a 50-year lifespan, the dam, and he also said that it also had cracks in it and it had moved, and the top of it is designed to come off if there's ever a flood or anything. So I wonder if that is the case.
Talking there about the Scotts Peak Dam, which holds back the top headwaters of the Huon River, but it's a small component of the scheme, and is different to the Lake Pedder Dam, which is downstream it's a cement dam downstream on the Serpentine River. Just one tiny dam holding back all the waters that flood over Lake Pedder. And he's right, there's a limit, as we saw in that film, on the age of all dams. In fact, if you pick up the Cygnet classifieds at the moment, you'll see that they're removing 2 dams from the back of Mount Cygnet because they're old and they're being decommissioned. So is one up at the back of Tolosa, up on the back of Hobart. Now, that's part of the ageing cycle. I just should add here 2 things. One, I think the area of restoration that's involved here would be of the same order. We need to check the figures of this, of the area burnt in the fires in the last couple of months. Longer flooding is more damaging, of course, but both those areas will be restored by nature, given a chance. The second thing is that the amount of power coming out of being provided by Lake Pedder, and it largely ends up going to meet peak demand on the mainland, is very, very tiny. It's much less than half the amount of the new solar plant being put in at Port Augusta, for example. So a small, by modern standards, solar scheme built on the mainland would easily replace the power that's coming out of Lake Beda.
Thank you very much, Bob. And did you want to add anything, Christine? Sorry.
Well, just that when the hydro talks about taking Lake Pedder out of the system, they talk about foregone revenue in terms of their storage issues. But you never get to hear of how much money they're spending to have to maintain ageing dams. So that figure of how much they're actually spending on maintenance and what they anticipate they'll have to spend on maintenance to look after Scotts Peak and Edgar and Serpentine and so on, we have to actually have that in the equation. So I think Bob's absolutely right. We're talking about, I think the hydro suggested it was 65 megawatts or something, that was the equivalent of Pedder in an integrated system. That is nothing. What they anticipate from pumped hydro storage is in the vicinity of, I think, 2,000 megawatts, that sort of thing. So it's minuscule in the scheme of power. It's huge in the scheme of putting the heart back in the wilderness.
Is there another question? Yes, Sophie.
I was just wondering if you have any idea of the cost of doing something like this. I guess, is that part of the research you'll be doing?
Yeah, that's part of the reason why we're doing the research, because until you've got that information, it's really hard to estimate it.
Yes, in the mid-90s they said 800 million. The cost of not doing it is quite considerable, as Christine was just indicating. And it's all about the supply of power, and as I was just saying, replacing it is becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So we're in a very different situation to the 1990s, let alone the 1970s, when Pedder was flooded. And every day the comparative cost of restoring Pedder is less. But it is, as we've heard, the studies to look at restoring Lake Pedder must involve the economics, the engineering and the ecological components, as well as the advantages. Of course, we've had the question raised with us a number of times, how on earth are you going to keep the people back as Pedder is restored, people wanting to see it? There's going to be a boost to the local tourism industry, and managing that, of course, is going to be a very pleasant headache.
And at the back there, you can yell if you're confident in your vocal projection, or wait.
Hi, thanks for the great film and presentation. Now, it mentioned that there's a number of species that were unique to Pedder in the film, and I believe there's a couple of species made extinct by the flooding. Would you mind elaborating on that, please?
Sorry, which species?
There's the Galaxid, the Pedderensis, which is actually extinct in the wild in Lake Pedder. Now there are two populations of that fish species that are still existing, and one is in the Strathgordon Water Supply Dam, and another one is up in Lake Oberon. So that's, I suppose, one of those benefits and advantages that we see in terms of the restoration, looking at the potential to rewild and reintroduce that species into the original Lake Pedder.
I think the film mentioned that there might have been, was it 16 or 18 species unique, flora and fauna?
Yes, there are, and you can see those listed in the scientific studies at the time. Some of those a couple of those have since been found in adjacent areas. We human beings are a little bit impatient, but depending on which geological history you read, Lake Pedder might be 10,000 years old. That was the old idea, but Evan Kiernan's work takes it back much further. But in the evolution of those unique species in the lake area, if they have been made extinct, depends on us just being patient enough after the lake reforms for them to come back again. There is no other option.
there another question? Oh, yeah, down the front here.
After seeing the movie, are you inspired to restore the Shannon Rise?
So for people at the back, that was, is anyone feeling inspired to restore the Shannon Rise?
The Shannon Rise was actually a unique phenomenon that occurred in the Shannon impoundment when that was just impounded just below Great Lake. And that was actually due to what actually happens when you impound a river system and a lake system. That is, you get a flush of nutrients, you also get a flush of, I suppose, macroinvertebrates and those sorts of species. So that's what you're actually getting. What you do is you supercharge the food chain essentially, and that ecology then led to all the introduced trout and feeding on the macroinvertebrates, and you got those huge fish and that sort of thing. Now that is a really ephemeral thing that's been recorded in fisheries and impoundments throughout the world, that you have this huge abundance of fish, they get really big fat fish, and then once those areas become more stable and aquatic, that those fish sort of drop off. So that's probably something that's just happened at a point in time. And it did happen with Lake Pedder as well, but the fisheries data that's been coming out of those impoundments as they age sort of shows that the fish numbers, you generally end up with larger amounts of smaller fish over time.
So we have probably time for just one more question. Does anyone have the lucky last one there? Oh, right at the very back. There, the back row is very active.
I suppose from my perspective, I can sort of envision that downstream there will be lots of benefits, but upstream, I have difficulty seeing where or how the system is actually going to recover to. You've got that beautiful image up there, but the beach surely will never return. Because there's going to be a massive silt residue initially, so it's going to be a totally different landscape, surely.
Yeah, look, the sediment dynamics under the impoundment have changed substantially, of course, to what was in the landscape at the time. There would have been, with talking about Pedder as a lake, but you've also got to consider the Serpentine River that used to come into the lake itself and the sediment that it used to bring into the lake itself. So over time, those sediment balances will get restored back to, we're expecting, and it has been shown in a lot of other cases, will be restored. So you get that, the building of the dunes and those sorts of things happening back in those other processes as well. So yes, I think you saw from the film as well that it's going to look substantially different when it's first, when you first dewatered. And there will be sediment that's been confirmed by people who have actually taken cameras and had a look over the lake floor and that sort of thing. A lot of that sediment will be fine silt because of the nature of the sediments and the peat in the area. That will blow away, will wash away, it will move around over time. So yeah, we're not going to drain it, it's not going to look like that instantly, but the restoration of those natural sediment processes and sediment budgets that have been happening over tens of thousands of years should actually be reinstated.
And the beautiful thing about it is that the dam's configured so that the water flows in at the back and then flows back out at the back. And Lake Pedder's in the middle of the reservoir, and there's very little movement. It's not like the run of the rivers that we've seen in the American context. So divers that went down more than a decade ago to have a look, 50 feet down at the beach, found it was largely intact. And in fact, the tracks of the last planes that took off are still sitting there. It's a miracle of luck, if you like, that how rapidly or slow to lower the water is going to be very important about the ecological system around the basin that's now flooded, and for the sand dunes when they, which were burnt out by a bushfire, by the way, back before the mid-1950s, to make sure that they recover without too much wear. But as to the beach, I think it's going to be one of the first parts that's going to, very, as you said, very rapidly come to be, because it's essentially sitting there undisturbed.
Thank you all very much. Oh yes, of course, Don, go for it.
I just wanted to finish off also by reinforcing Christine's message in the short film before, that ecological restoration isn't just a opportunity to right wrongs. It's also should be seen as an opportunity to redefine growth and actually look at a paradigm where growth is measured in terms of ecological restoration rather than economic growth and development in a finite world. So I think that's a really important part of this whole process.
Thank you so much. We're really, again, as I